We good? You ready?
Yes.
Got some stuff to say?
I guess so. Maybe.
All right.
We don't find out.
Books. Books. Books.
Hello and welcome to Didn't Read It, the podcast that wants you to stop it.
Stop what?
Exactly. I am still Grace Todd, your host and resident book gremlin, and I am still here with Lee Rossi, and we are still discussing Rose Macaulay's What Not.
What not?
Now, Lee, welcome back.
Thanks.
The last time we were together, we spent most of our time running through the plot, the what of it all, the what of what not. For those of us who maybe have taken some time between these two episodes, do you think you could give us an extremely quick and dirty recap?
Let's see.
In case anyone needs their memory refreshed.
Can I? Okay. So I'm off to a good start.
Slaying the game.
Okay. So it's after the First World War, which they don't know is just the first one. But it's actually released during the war. Impressive. And so it's sometime after that, and it follows this lady who's a little sassy, and she works for this government propaganda arm. And the whole point of that is the reason the Great War happened is because people were too stupid. So if we make everyone smarter, another war will never happen. And so this whole branch of the government is dedicated to making people smarter with some not so great policies, one of which is general public education, which is good, if not well implemented. And the other one is raiding babies and basically killing the ones that aren't smart enough. So, there's like some side characters, some friends and everything, but the main plot is that she meets the guy who heads it all. They fall in love. They end up getting married, which has to be secret because he's technically not allowed to get married because he has people with disabilities in his family. So they don't want him making babies, but they get married anyway. Don't interrupt me. I'm on a roll. I'm doing good. And it goes public and everyone's like, you're a hypocrite, and it all comes crumbling down, and he kind of changes his mind because he really believed in the whole thing, and she's like, you silly hottie, just stop it, just be cute. And he's like, you know what, maybe I was wrong, and he gets the shit kicked out of him at the end, rightly so. And then the ministry falls apart and they just go off and live their lives.
Well done.
I did better than I thought I would. I'm not gonna lie.
That was impeccable.
I didn't think it was gonna go very well, but I surprised even myself.
No, you did great. The only two quick notes.
No notes. I refuse. Stop it.
The only two things I will say for anyone who's trying to remember from last time, this novel was published immediately after the war.
I think I meant she wrote it during the war.
She did write it during the war. She wrote another anti-war novel. This is an anti-eugenics novel. She wrote an anti-war novel that came out during the war. And then the only other thing I will say is the babies who are being murdered are abandoned babies.
First, they're abandoned by their families because their families don't want to have to pay taxes on their stupid babies.
Correct.
And then the government rounds them up and kills them.
Yes, but just the abandoned ones.
Just the abandoned ones.
The other stupid babies are just being taxed.
Yeah.
It's not a huge distinction, but it's a bit of one.
Yeah.
There's
the government's not all bad.
The government is not snatching babies from people's arms.
Right.
Except sort of with extra steps.
Yeah.
So that is the world and ethos of Whatnot.
And it's funny and clever, and the propaganda is really funny.
The propaganda is great. So now that you've been through it, do you have you've got big questions, observations, impressions, anything you want to kick off on?
I mean, I think the thing that keeps coming up so much for both of us and that we've talked about is that it just all feels very depressingly familiar. And the banality of the fuckery.
The bureaucracy of it all.
I think one thing that we've been talking about a lot is that the banality of it all and the banality of the bureaucracy feels very distressingly familiar.
Yeah, because it's so laughable. It's having real and horrifying consequences on people's lives and people's families, and we see that. That's not entirely hidden from us, But on a day-to-day basis, it is almost offensively stupid in execution.
Yeah.
The way that bureaucracies so often are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard not to laugh. And that feels, I think, achingly familiar to anyone who has made a joke sometime in the last few years about having to live through the dumbest dystopia possible.
The most boring dystopia.
Where we still have to get up and go to work. And sometimes we have to work at the Ministry of Brains.
Yeah. Oh, God. I mean, having worked a few jobs that I felt were evil, were contributing to evil, the cognitive dissonance every morning is not fun.
What I find so interesting about Kitty as a character is that you don't get the impression that she's that fussed about it.
Mm-mm.
She's pretty checked out in a way. The world is and has gone completely to pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And she, especially at the beginning of the book, is just kind of getting through it.
Yeah.
Trying to have the most fun she can.
Mm-hmm.
And I get it.
She's kind of like, I seen some shit. Everything's fucked. There's nothing I can really do about it. So I'm just going to have fun while I can.
Yeah, pretty much. And I don't know if that's necessarily an ideal way to live, but I think one of the things that Macaulay seems really interested in is what happens when you are burdened with knowledge that you can't meaningfully do anything about, and like how that plays out in different people and in different people's lives, and how people handle that. So you have to think, I mean, it is 1919 when the book comes out. Women only recently kind of got the right to vote in the UK.
Yeah.
So for an entire generation of young women who lived through the war, the sheer powerlessness of having to kind of wake up every day and face this world that they have no real leverage in.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you just check out?
Yeah, I know I would, for sure.
But it feels like over the course of the book, Kitty starts to realize maybe what she does and doesn't care about. Like,
yeah.
she's becoming more awake to what is happening.
Yeah.
And falling in love with Chester, which is really interesting because Chester is...
He was never part of the plan.
He's what and who he is, you know what I mean?
Yeah, he's Mr. Brain himself.
And what's so interesting about this novel, historically and in terms of like Rose Macaulay's career, is that I was utterly shocked to find that both of the biographies I read and a lot of scholarship around this book focus almost exclusively on the affair part of it and just gloss over all of the politics.
That's like the least interesting part of it.
And what's more, there seems to be an impression that the novel might be pro-eugenics rather than anti-eugenics.
Like people who take Jonathan Swift seriously?
It feels a little bit like that.
Yeah.
The narrator kind of talks about everyone being pretty stupid. The narrator is not shy about saying that, like, the people of England are standing in their own way, but the narrator is also quite frequently adopting what is clearly the government line of thinking.
Yeah.
That is how satire works.
Yeah.
But a lot of people have taken the narration to be Macaulay's unironic positions.
Is this contemporary scholarship or is this later?
Both. And I want to be clear, there's very little scholarship on this book in general.
Yeah.
I am usually standing on the backs of giants.
No Norton Critical Edition.
No Norton Critical Edition here. So we're coming at this a little
fast and loose.
Little raw dog.
Okay. Ooh.
I'm not being protected from the syphilis of mistakes by the rubber sheath of previous scholarship.
That's how stupid babies are born, Grace.
Why did I need to make that metaphor? I am not sure.
We're talking a lot about procreation.
That is true.
Okay.
So there is an idea that this novel is pro-eugenics, which I disagree with.
Yeah, that seems pretty clear to me, at least.
All of the pro-eugenics characters are
ridiculous.
Yeah.
The propaganda is ridiculous.
Everyone's kind of ridiculous. And
yeah.
I think it's two things. First, we culturally, and I think even, in a scholarly way, start from the default position of eugenics being monstrous. And we struggle to uncouple it when looking at contemporary, when looking at literature from a specific time period.
Yeah.
We struggle to uncouple our impressions of eugenics from all the stuff that came later.
Yeah.
This is a person for whom World War II has not happened. The Third Reich did not exist.
Yeah.
mass sterilization laws are just beginning to be implemented in the United States. They are not ever implemented in the UK, but they are being debated and discussed in the early 19-teens. Eugenics for a woman in Rose Macaulay's position is a relatively new idea that is being actively debated and explored. It has not yet been widely applied to anything. People are trying to figure out how it works, what it might look like to implement these ideas. It's all new. It's all like a big question mark.
Well, I guess it's new kind of in those explicit terms, but like the underpinnings of it have been around for, centuries, as colonialism to go like tame and minister to the quote unquote savages of the world, and spread the civility of the British Empire.
Sure. So to be a little bit hair splitty though.
Sure, no, split the hairs.
Like you are talking about a potent cocktail of like white supremacy and rule by birthright and all of these things that are rolled into eugenics. But eugenics as like a science and a concept is in the 19-teens brand new and has the sort of stolen valor of science. Around it.
The faux science.
And so even people who think of themselves as very liberal, people who are pushing for social betterment, are falling into these kind of mind traps of, well, if poverty isn't inherent, if people who are poor aren't poor because God hates them, well, then what is it? And how could it happen?
Yeah, there must be a reason.
Maybe it's bad breeding.
Yeah.
And if it's bad breeding, maybe we can help them uplift themselves. And I also want to be clear that, like, I am not trying to excuse these things.
No, I know you're not.
We're looking at a novel written in 1918 by a woman who looked at that line of thinking and went, oh, no, that's never going to work.
Yeah.
It's like...
impressive, honestly.
Yeah, like... She looked at all of this early science and was like, to do that would become monstrous.
I mean, I am impressed because not a lot of other people were pushing back at the time.
What I find so interesting about the novel is that I think she is sympathetic to the idea of embarking on a project of human improvement. Like, she understands where it's coming from because, again, it has not yet been tainted by all of the horrible things that are going to happen very soon.
Yeah, real soon.
These things are still happening, especially in England, in a lot of ways, kind of in the abstract. And she's sympathetic to the motives. And what's interesting about the novel is that she is not addressing the ethics of it so much as the practicalities of it.
Yeah.
Like, she is engaging it less on a moral level than on a logistical one, because if you can illustrate step by step, facet by facet, as she does in this novel, that such a project would be impossible.
Yeah.
Then why argue about the ethics of it? If it can't be done, you don't need to waste a bunch of time saying whether it's right or wrong to do it.
Interesting.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does.
I want to be very clear. Like, this is just my impression of it.
Yeah.
But I think the reason that people can come away from it being unsure is that they're expecting this really strident moralizing.
Yeah.
Whereas instead, this is a much more subtle, she is illustrating how you wind up with a secret room of dead babies.
Yeah.
Starting from good intentions.
Yeah.
And how it can happen no matter where you stand on whether or not the country's intellect needs to be fixed. And also, the country's intellect can't be fixed. And is it because eugenics doesn't work? Is it because people are too stupid to want to be embettered? It doesn't really matter, because it's always going to end with a room of dead babies.
Yeah. It's funny because the way you described it just now reminded me of Sorry to Bother You.
Oh, yeah.
With the horse people at the end.
Yeah.
Sorry, spoiler. If you hadn't seen it, you should have seen it by now. It's a very good movie.
It's a fantastic movie. I love that movie.
And it is I wouldn't call it, it's not similar in a lot of ways, but just the small little seemingly dumb things that add up to, where did you think this was going to go? Like this horrific ending. It's just like, what did you think was going to happen? This is how this plays out.
Yeah,
you know?
this is what happens when you start trying to breed humans like livestock.
Yeah.
Humans are inevitably treated like livestock.
Yeah.
That's how it's gonna go.
That's what's gonna happen.
But like, it was wild to me reading about it and the number of people who were like, did Rose Macaulay agree with eugenics? We'll never know.
And that's like serious scholarship?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's not a ton of it.
Yeah.
But, and then...
That's surprising to me.
As I said at the beginning of the last episode, this book was pulled to be censored.
Right.
Which delayed
Not
its publication by a year.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, this book is playing with all of these really, really interesting themes of eugenics and societal improvement. Both of her biographies do not say a word about eugenics. They don't say a word about the politics of the book. All they want to talk about is the idea that in this novel, Rose is somehow like working through her conflicted feelings about the affair she was having with a married man around the time that the book came out.
Bro, that's the least interesting thing happening here.
It really is.
I mean, sure. Yeah. When were her biographies written?
The more contemporary one I have came out in 2003.
Oh, that's recent. That's disappointing.
Yeah, they really did her dirty.
Yeah.
One of them doesn't mention the censorship at all. Literally, it is not mentioned.
Yeah.
And one of them mentions it in like a single sentence.
This is an injustice. Because here's this like great political novel reduced to like a rom-com.
Yeah, that's all anyone seems to want to talk about. It seems like they don't know what to make of it, or they're so distracted by the scandal of the affair that they just want to make it all about the affair.
But the affair is all about the hypocrisy and the idiocy of the rules. of the government rules.
Yeah.
Words are failing me. I mean, words often fail me, but the affair is a symbol.
Yeah, well, and like it sells it all so short, and I feel like it sells her so short.
Oh,
like,
for sure.
Oh, she wrote this really fascinating, wildly ahead of its time book that maybe had concepts borrowed from it for Brave New World. They were contemporaries. He was probably aware of this book.
Yeah.
And there are things about it that are very much mirrored in Brave New Worlds.
I'm not gonna lie, I've never read it.
It doesn't matter. The point is, it's a very similar dystopia, but much darker and
not as fun.
Not as fun.
Woo!
But she seems to have acknowledged that he like borrowed from her and like thought it was cute. He was younger. He was like up and coming when she
like,
was
sure.
Yeah, basically.
Was her book successful when it was released? Was it popular?
Middlingly.
Okay.
So one of the things that I find so interesting about Rose Macaulay is that I feel like we have done her dirty writ large in life. Her career while she was alive was very, very successful. She was well known. She was famous. She was more successful than Virginia Woolf. They knew each other, but like that's just an easy metric.
Yeah.
She outsold Virginia Woolf in life.
Yeah.
And then after her death, she seems to have just been forgotten for a while. And obviously there are many reasons that authors fall by the wayside, that their reputations don't last. But I do think it's really interesting that we have this woman who wrote books that were all over the map. This is her only work of science fiction. And then her novels are all quite different, and they evolved as she evolved over the course of her life.
Yeah.
She had a very long life. She died as an old lady.
In when? Like in what decade?
She died in 1958.
Okay. Yeah. So she lived quite a bit longer.
Yeah, there are varying reasons why authors' legacies do or don't withstand the test of time. But it is interesting to me that...
I just think it's funny. Sorry, go on.
Well, it is. A of all, it's funny, but it doesn't mean it's not very, very clever. B of all, it does kind of feel like one of the things that we have a hard time with is treating women authors with respect, especially from before a certain decade, unless they flame out against the injustices of the patriarchy and kill themselves.
That's so true. That's so true. And even then, they're kind of, I don't know, they're just kind of treated as an manic pixie dream girl.
How dare you have a long and successful career and have a happy life and have a lifelong affair with a married man because you never wanted to get married and you realized that the easiest way to avoid having to have children and be somebody's wife was to have a lifelong affair with a married man.
Yeah, that's Rose. That's what Rose did. Okay.
And I say good for her.
Yeah, well, I don't care. Good for you, girl.
But it's not sad, sexy baby. It's a woman who just lived an adult woman's life.
Yeah, just being a grown-up.
And wrote like 8 novels or something wild and did very well for herself.
Yeah.
How dare she?
All around, kind of a badass.
Yeah. Love her. And again, I've said this before, I will say it again on this podcast, we do not attempt to retroactively classify people's sexualities. However, she had a lifelong, deep-seated ambivalence toward her own gender, which began when she was a very small child. She always wanted to be a boy.
Yeah.
Very specifically, she wanted to be a sea captain.
Oh, ahoy.
And it wasn't until she was in her teens that her father was finally like, you cannot be a sea captain, Rose. You are a girl. You need to behave like a girl. And she was like,
That's bullshit.
yeah, no, she hated it. And her novels are full of very androgynous characters, kind of masculine women, kind of feminine men. It's a lot of men with kind of effeminate names, girls with kind of masculine names. She was not down with gender as it had been presented to her, and she spent a lot of her life fiddling with it.
Yeah.
And again,
Good
I
for
am
her.
not saying that in another lifetime she would have been trans, but I'm not saying it either, because she seems to have intensely and intuitively hated being a woman.
Those are the facts. Draw what conclusions you may. It's interesting that you bring up transness, because we were chatting about the banality of the evil of some government measures, and you brought up the current war on trans people, basically, and how so much of the legislation is just fucking dumb and just banal, small and everything, but it opens the door to this, you know, the path leads to this horror show.
That's how the horrors start, right? Is with laughably absurd, boring little bureaucrats making boring little rules that ruin people's very real lives. One of the things that I love that this novel really underlines is it's funny when it's happening. It's darkly funny, but it is funny. You can get on any social media platform at any point and you're going to find some centrist liberal mom in Massachusetts with like vote blue no matter who in her profile picture, making jokes about Ron DeSantis doing something stupid or how he's being so hypocritical.
Yeah.
Pointing out the hypocrisy.
Yeah.
And laughing about it. And it is darkly funny. It's also horrifying.
Yeah.
And it can be both things, but don't be so busy laughing that you forget to be horrified.
Well, and honestly, that's one thing that like keeps popping up in my head is I feel like the way we've hopefully learned to take things that seem ridiculous seriously over the past decade, and movements that grew that we were like, that is so dumb, that will never catch on. I'm not a big fan of electoral politics anymore, but just, you know, the 2016 election, like, he's so stupid, he'll never get elected. Not taking things seriously because we think they're so dumb.
You are more hopeful than I am, I have to say.
You think we're still doing that very much?
I think a lot of people are.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people. Well, yeah. I mean, I guess
maybe the majority of people.
The change that I'm talking about is very incremental.
That is true. And I think one of the things, calling myself to task here, one of the things that Macaulay intuitively seems to have understood is how easy and intoxicating and comfortable and comforting it can be to look across the vast sea of humanity and go, every single one of these people is f***ing stupid. Just all of them, all of us, every single one, birth to death. God, we're dumb. And it's not true, and it's not good, and it's not a healthy instinct, but it is a place I think a lot of us land now and again.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, like we do all. I know I definitely think that plenty of times.
It takes a lot more work to look again at the vast sea of humanity and to see in it anything worth loving.
Well, I guess, I mean, my next conclusion after that, like, oh, we're all just a bunch of little dum-dums. My next conclusion isn't, and so we don't deserve rights.
No, I know,
you know
but that's no, 100%. And that's what I'm saying is I think one of the other reasons that people are attributing a certain ambivalence in Macaulay's writing towards the idea of eugenics is that one of the conclusions of the novel kind of is, well, we are all just a bunch of dum-dums.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean we deserve to suffer, but just writ large, we are a bunch of dum-dums.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
I think it's okay. I've accepted it about myself.
I think it's hard to remember sometimes that it's okay. And yes, when a ministry of brains or anything like a ministry of brains comes into existence, you should, rightfully, storm the steps and set it on fire.
Yeah. Let's rewind.
I didn't say that.
Delete. Delete.
We're all dum-dums doesn't mean that you should just coast through whatever horrors come your way and let them happen without pushing back against them.
Well, I guess to me it means like we shouldn't be so fucking hubristic.
Well,
you
and
know?
I think the novel too is really preoccupied with the inherent blindness of idealism of any kind, and how much being a truly driven idealist makes you prone to extremism.
Yeah.
And prone to shuffling away the human cost of your goals as acceptable casualties, you know? From Macaulay's perspective, I think Chester's goals to her are not inherently evil in and of themselves. It's just that the way he is going about them is very, very wrong and doomed to failure.
Yeah.
But it's also good to remember that she is contrasting all of the horrifying eugenics-y baby stuff against the mass education program.
Yeah. I didn't think too hard about that, but that is a good complication.
If you dive in and you start taking this book apart, like a Lego structure, and you're looking at all the different little bricks and things, if you take away the compulsory education part, the conclusion very easily becomes we shouldn't expect humanity to ever be better, and we shouldn't expect anything to ever improve, and we should just let humanity continue to trip and fall onto its own face.
The movie
and
Idiocracy, basically.
And like start all the wars that they want.
Yeah.
But then there's this complicating little Lego in the mind training courses where Macaulay is suggesting quietly around the fringes that they are having some kind of an effect. That some people are finding them improving. Some people are looking at the world differently because they're having their horizons broadened. And that unfortunately, this program is irretrievably tied to the eugenics part of it all.
Yeah.
And so they succeed or fail together because the government has overstepped itself.
Yeah.
In a horrifying way because the government is stupid.
That feels familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there's a little wrinkle there, right? Like maybe people can be a little more thoughtful. We're not.
Or perhaps if you give people resources.
Exactly. That's
you
what
know?
It's not about breeding humans. It's about taking the humans you have and giving them the resources that they need to maybe have a broader perspective, to understand the world around them in a way that's a little more complicated and a little less black and white.
Who'da thunk it? You mentioning about the idealism, it's interesting because so I looked a little bit, I tried to do a like quick research into like women writers around this time period, and what I found, granted it was a quick research, what I found was after each of the world wars, and I think it was what I found mostly was talking about like British women writers, after each of the world wars they were obviously very disillusioned and very ambivalent because their roles had changed drastically during the war, and then they had to go back to the domestic space afterwards, and kind of the mind fuck that all, you know, the cognitive dissonance. But what I read is that after the First World War, out of it kind of grew an idealism, I guess, about women's roles and what they could become and the power of the domestic sphere, I guess. And then after the Second World War, that ambivalence turned into just total disillusionment and just like fuck all this basically. And I don't really know what that says about this, but it was, I don't know, it was the context that I tried to bring into this. And so it's interesting to hear, like, I mean, it definitely, it seems to set Rose Macaulay out as maybe an outlier. I don't know.
In everything I have read about her, I get the impression that she was very much an outlier in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
This book does not romanticize the domestic at all. Like one of the consistent through lines with the mind training courses specifically is that women are furious about them because they keep trying to explain that they don't have any fucking spare time. They keep like there are multiple scenes where women are trying to explain like, I do not have time to go take your stupid mind training course because I am drowning in childcare and dishes and cooking and this and that. And I am exhausted. And at the end of the day, I just fall over and then I wake up and then I do it all over again.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares about mind training? I'm desperately trying to keep my head above water here.
Yeah.
And the men from like the Ministry of Brains keep telling them like, oh, if you go to the mind training courses, you'll be so much improved that your domestic work will take half the time.
What?
And they're like, sure, sure, honey.
That's not how it works.
Like,
you can't, people with higher IQs can't fold laundry faster.
Macaulay is constantly underlining the drudgery and the unfairness of what is being expected of women. It's a truly domestic dystopia. It is a dystopia written from the perspective of the domestic and of the feminine, which you don't see often. It's so centered on the burdens that are being put specifically on women and the expectations that are being held for women. And a thing that I do a lot with literature of previous time periods, so anytime I'm reading like what we'll call, for sake of ease, like classic literature,
oldies,
I always look for the characters who are happy.
Okay.
There are usually very few of them.
Yeah.
You usually don't see them for very long, but they will almost always betray something about how an author feels. Because authors can very rarely resist slipping in a little fantasy character for themselves. Like someone who is either truly genuinely happy or who is positioned as being on their way to happiness.
Yeah.
And the person who is happy in this book, uncomplicatedly happy, is Pansy Ponsonby.
Yeah, okay.
Pansy is happy.
Yeah.
She has a partner who loves her. She has a child that she loves. They live in a comfortable house in a village where they're being kind of made into pariahs because they're not married, but not really, not in any meaningful sense. And she also doesn't really seem to care.
Yeah.
She has a career that matters to her, that she's very good at, that her husband is not standing, or not husband, that her partner is not standing in the way of, and in fact encourages.
Yeah.
Pansy has it all.
Yeah.
And Pansy is completely outside of the confines of what is expected of all of the other women in this book.
Yeah. Is Ivy happy at all? Or is she just kind of...
Ivy seems like she'll be okay. I forgot to bring this up in the
summary,
but the last time we see Ivy is after Kitty has secretly married Chester. And Ivy comes to Kitty saying that she has fallen in love with a young man who is like a C3. And they're not
forgetting these ratings.
They can't get, they're not supposed to get married, right? Because they'll be horribly taxed, but they love each other.
Oh, because Ivy's dumb?
No, Ivy's smart.
Oh.
He's dumb.
But isn't that good?
C3's bad.
Oh, I thought the baby would be balanced out though.
No, it's C3's
too bad.
It's too far. Yeah. He's uncertified for marriage, or uncertificated for marriage.
Okay.
And Ivy is pouring her heart out to Kitty about how she feels like a hypocrite. But she loves him, and they love each other so much that there's no way they would marry anyone else. So isn't it just a waste if they don't get married when the other option would be to stay single? It's very sweet. She's kind of talking herself around in a circle.
Yeah.
And Kitty is more or less like, you should just do what makes you happy. Like, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And
I can't say why, but...
And Ivy's like, oh, but if the minister found out, he'd be so angry because of what a hypocrite I am. And Kitty no, Kitty literally just goes, well, and then they get interrupted. That's it. So that's the last time we see Ivy, and she'll probably be fine, but she's quite young.
Yeah.
She's pointed toward happiness.
Yeah.
But she's not yet there. And I love that we have Pansy as a character who is just this
free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she's already there. She's already occupying the space.
Yeah.
And she's having a great time.
Yeah. Sounds like it. She seems cool.
And she's completely flouting everything to do with baby rules and registry, whatever. She doesn't care.
She definitely seems like a very modern character.
That is who Rose is kind of tucking into the fringes of this novel. Anytime an author bothers to create a character who's genuinely happy,
it says something.
You pay attention.
Yeah. That's a good tip. I never really thought about that.
We've talked about Idiocracy a bunch because obviously we have. But I'm trying to think of other domestic dystopias, other explicitly feminist dystopias.
I mean, there's like Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah.
There aren't a ton, I think. Science fiction, and especially like dystopian science fiction, especially in the United States, tends to be really dominated by kind of like the rugged individualism. The one man who's going to disband it all through sheer force of will.
Yeah.
And this novel instead is about society self-correcting as a populist movement, as a group.
That's really cool.
Through the combined power of the press and the people pushing back en masse.
Yeah.
Which is great. And I'd like to see more of it.
That definitely feels like something that won't happen again in literature for a while. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because as you just said, like we're so tied to the individualist narrative.
I'm only part of the way through it, so I can't say how it's going to end. But I did, somewhat serendipitously, I started reading Jessamine Chan's The School for Good Mothers right around when I was starting to do the research for this episode. It's much darker.
Yeah.
It's darkly funny in places, but it doesn't have the sort of P.G. Wodehouse brightness of Macaulay's. Nor should it. I'm not saying that's a knock against it, but it is also like a very intimate domestic feminist dystopia. And it's another one where it does that thing that Macaulay did so well, where there's a lag between when it starts and when you start to slowly realize that this is not our current era.
Yeah.
It goes sideways very slowly and kind of insidiously, and it's a slow burn. It's phenomenal so far. I don't want to spoil anything. It's much more personal. Like we follow our protagonist much more closely. It is writ less at the societal level, but again, I'm only like part of the way through it. It's really good so far. It feels like a more comprehensive next step, kind of from the questions that Macaulay was asking.
Yeah.
It's asking much bigger, knottier, uglier questions about the way that we police women and motherhood and the standards that we hold women and mothers up to and how those are utilized in pursuit of making society better and healthier and smarter.
Yeah.
It's real good. It's real.
Oh,
It's fucked up, but like, it's so good.
you love a fucked up book.
I do. More people should read fucked up books.
Yeah.
Catharsis, baby. That's the only way we'll make it through.
Yeah. I like fucked up books. I just read them real slow because I avoid them. I'm like, oh, maybe I should read a little bit. And I'm like, oh, I'm a slow reader.
That's okay to be a slow reader.
Yeah.
You can read slow. You can read fast. You can read any which way.
Yeah.
This is an equal opportunity podcast.
Thanks.
And, you know, to all of my baby loves out there, you don't have to love fucked up literature as much as me, but I think it's good for us, writ large.
Every now and then.
I think catharsis is important. It is a healthy and meaningful way to explore the absolutely awful shit we have to deal with every day.
Yeah.
In a way that allows you to process it all the way through and like put it down at the end. Instead of just carrying this box of feelings around that you haven't had the time to do anything with, that just gets added to all day, every day.
I mean, that is science, and that is actually something I've learned about in managing my own emotional health, is that the stress response is part of a cycle, and that you need to complete the stress cycle in order to release it, so that you're not just, with so much of the chronic stress of modern life, we're actually just caught in the extended fight, flight, or freeze mode. And you actually have to, what you're talking about with the catharsis, you actually have to complete the stress cycle through, I don't know, movement, screaming, crying, there's a lot of different ways to kind of do it. And that, I think, the release you get from books like this, I think, is a form of that.
Because then you get to the end of the book and then the book is over.
Yeah.
Oh, I should note in full clarity, there's a real weird note. It's only like 2 sentences long. There's a real weird little mini thing about Jewish people.
Oh. Uh-oh.
It's a strange one, and I'm not entirely sure what to make of it, because it's literally like 2 lines.
And by note, you mean, does she have footnotes in the story, or what?
No, I just mean like it's one of those little side details that you get, especially in science fiction, where it's just kind of like, oh, and here's another little world building fact.
Yeah.
And what it tells you is that most Jewish people in England have been forcibly repatriated to the Holy City, and that the Jewish people remaining are exempt from the provisions of both the Mental Progress Act and the Mind Training Act, because they do not need to become any cleverer.
That's fucked up.
It is. It's unclear how Macaulay feels about it, if that makes any sense. Everything else this government is doing is pretty bad and horrible. And Macaulay in life, I believe, she was not an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
And had close friends of many religious backgrounds.
Yeah.
And so I just felt like I had to point out that there is this very brief thing wherein the government in the novel is also anti-Semitic.
I mean, there was, from what I remember, I took like 1 Victorian literature class in college, and now you get to listen to the wheels in my head squeak. I try to remember anything about it. One of the books we read was, I want to say, Daniel Deronda, which is about the protagonist is a Jewish man who, remember the plot, existing, trying to find love, I don't know, but it dealt with a lot of, there was like a very deep and long held anti-Semitic current in British history. Yeah, like a huge thing.
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, it was, anti-Semitism is everywhere all the time and runs very deep.
Yeah, for a very long time.
As witnessed by all of the things that happen, or roughly 20 years after this novel comes out.
You mean there's another one?
But considering like when it was written and what it's about, I did find it interesting that there was this little blink and you'll miss it acknowledgement of the government being shittily anti-Semitic. Mm-hmm. In addition to all of the other things.
Yeah.
Like, she could have just left that out and nobody would have noticed, really, especially because her readers...
Because it's a fictional world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She took the time to be like, and also they were killing babies and also they were anti-Semitic. And that seems...
Yeah.
Important.
But she didn't dive into it.
No. But it's a pretty short novel.
Yeah.
And again, the legacy of it was just Rose Macaulay wrote a whole dystopian science fiction novel to deal with the fact that she was having an affair.
And she couldn't handle it. She built a whole world on her own guilt.
It's all very stupid. But I want to do more Rose Macaulay at some point.
It sounds like a great book.
Yeah, I want to come back around to her stories. And all of you out there, if you can think of any weirdly cozy domestic feminist dystopias, send them my way. I'm curious.
Are all of other Rose Macaulay's works so funny?
I believe so. She is primarily a satirist. Well, her first few were much more serious. One of the things that I was struck by when I was reading her biography is she's an example of something that we don't get to see anywhere near as often now because of the way that the publishing industry has changed, which is someone who started publishing pretty young, whose works matured as she was publishing them, and who published for her entire life.
Yeah. Interesting.
Especially and specifically in literary fiction.
Yeah.
There's a whole issue now with how debut novels are... So debut novels are essentially artificially weighted by the publishing industry because people will buy them because it feels like you're discovering something new.
Yeah.
There's a whole sort of publicity machine around debut novels specifically.
Yeah.
To the point where it's very well known now that the majority of authors struggle to publish their sophomore novels.
Yeah.
Specifically.
Reminds me of the music industry a lot too.
Yeah. And so we're missing out on the chance to see people mature in prose. And it's a shame because I think if you look at the literary greats, if you look back through history, through the people that we have all agreed are just incredible at writing, most of them hit their stride on their second, third, fourth novel.
Yeah.
So what are we missing?
Lots.
What are we missing out on as the reading public because publishing houses won't take a chance on publishing someone's second, third, fourth novel?
Yeah.
It's a damn shame.
Are you listening, industry?
But, Whatnot was one of the novels where she really hit her stride. It was when the way one of her biographers phrased it, it was almost like she suddenly remembered that she was a satirist at heart. Mm-hmm. And she suddenly remembered that she could have fun.
Yeah. Well, and I just love that. I love the final scene where it almost becomes meta.
Yeah.
With Nicholas laughing, realizing the humor in the situation and being like, this is fucking ridiculous. And then he gets the shit kicked out of him. So it's just a great last.
And deserved
action.
It.
Yeah.
To the eternal scorn of Vernon Prideaux.
To me, it's kind of like Rose Macaulay's kind of saying like satire is important for us to like process these like messy things and these bad things, but also some people just need the shit kicked out of them,
Yeah, honestly, yeah. I don't think that's unfair.
Yeah.
I can't believe that this novel gets sold so short.
Yeah.
So
bummer.
Well, thanks for sitting here with me while I yell about all the ways that I think it's been undersold.
Well, thanks for introducing it to me because it was a lot funnier than I thought it was gonna. I did not know what we were talking about today. I'm not gonna lie. You told me like women in the in like the war period. And
Yeah.
I was like, got it.
And eugenics.
I don't think you even gave me eugenics at the time.
I know at some point I texted you and was like, remember how we were talking about how we keep winding up talking about eugenics? Well, boy, have I got a novel for you.
Strap in.
Here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. A really fucking impressive novel.
Rose Macaulay.
What's the subtitle again?
What Not? A Prophetic Comedy.
When you first said it, when we first started talking about it, I was like, that's a little ballsy, but it's true.
There's like a little note at the beginning. Where is it? It opens with an apology, which is, one cannot write forevermore of life in wartime, even if, as at times seems possible, the war outlasts the youngest of us. Nor can one easily write of life as it was before this thing came upon us, for that is a queer, half-remembered thing to make one cry. This is a tale of life after the war, in which alone there is hope. But
it was interesting of her to write about what life would be like after the war while she's still kind of in it. 'Cause I feel like that's an approach we don't see very often in media.
yeah, she had as I think all great satirists do, she had kind of an unusual childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Her parents were both
Vickers.
more or less leftists and academics. Well, her father was an academic. Her mother would have been an academic, except that it was the Victorian era.
Yeah.
And so even though she was quite clever and very frustrated and objectively did not like babies, she had 7 of them.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oops.
Yeah, her mom had a rough go of it. But they moved to Italy when Rose was a baby and stayed there until she was in her early teens. And the children were allowed to run totally feral because they were in a small Italian village. There weren't other British people around. And so they missed all of the like really intense strictures of a Victorian childhood.
Yeah.
And then came back basically as teens. And so I think Rose had forever after an outsider's perspective.
Yeah, which allowed her to really make fun of how stupid a lot of it was.
Yeah, like simultaneously like an insider's understanding, but an outsider's perspective.
Yeah.
And she seems to have approached a lot of things in a really unique way. And then especially when you combine it with her ambivalence about marriage and gender and children.
Yeah.
You know, you wind up with someone who's going to take a pretty unique approach to what's going on in the world, especially when you look at the anti-war novel she published while the war was still happening, which people did not care for.
It didn't go over well.
She worked at a hospital and had a bad time.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was not cut out for it, but also the empty patriotism of the day did not seem able to carry her through the trauma of it all unscathed. And so while everyone else was like, it's to acknowledge that we're destroying these poor boys from the inside out. If we were to acknowledge it, it would be tantamount to betraying them. And she's like, maybe betraying them is blowing them up in the first place.
Just a thought.
Have you considered?
Who am I to say?
I do kind of want to do her anti-war novel next, although it's apparently it's not a satire, unfortunately. She's playing it straight.
Yeah.
We'll see how Rose Macaulay is when she's not making with the funny, because she was very, very funny.
Super funny. All the propaganda stuff just reminded me so much of Welcome to Night Vale, and it's weird science fiction, so outlandish, really funny, and it's like, here she was doing it 100 years before.
Maybe the reason we forgot about her for so long was because generation after generation of men picked up the book and were like, this isn't funny.
By the way, I just had this idea for a new story. Unrelated. The inspiration just struck me spontaneously.
All right.
Cool.
Any final thoughts? Any works of fiction you want to plug this week? Any authors you want to shout out?
Well, I just started reading, as I said, the book that you recommended last time we talked, fictionalization of Christopher Marlowe's Life as a Hot Young Spy.
I love that book so much.
Yeah, and it's super fun.
A Tip for the Hangman by Alison Epstein.
Yeah. To me, it's like a beach read, almost, except it's set in like cold Tudor England or Elizabethan England.
She has a new book coming out sometime soonish, and I'm very excited. It's called Let the Dead Bury the Dead.
Oh, I think you mentioned that.
Yeah.
Great title.
Yeah.
Before that, I had just finished a great piece of nonfiction by Sarah Broom called The Yellow House, which is like a multi-generational family memoir of her
Ooh.
family in New Orleans.
Oh, yeah.
Leading up to, during, and then after Katrina. And it is like, she is an essayist, and it was really good.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it sounds great. You texted me about it at one point, I think. And I was like, man, that sounds fun.
It's
Well, fun might be the wrong word. But
it's not fun. It's good. Yeah.
sounds cathartic.
Well, that's what I've been slowly reading.
That's great.
Yeah.
If everything we talked about today, if domestic dystopias and fraught ideas around eugenics and motherhood speak to you, I will once again, even though I'm halfway through, but I can't wait to finish, once again recommend The School for Good Mothers by Jessamine Chan. It's been killer so far, and I can't wait to wrap it up. Thank you, Lee, for being here with me.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you out there for listening. And as always, if you can, this week, this month, this pay period, consider supporting a living author, because they could really use the help.
Yeah.
Love you. Bye.
Love you. Thanks for listening.
Didn't Read It was created, written, and edited by me, Grace Todd. Kaylee Hughes is our publicist and producer. You can follow the podcast on Twitter or Instagram at Didn't Read It Pod, or reach us via email at didn'treaditpod@gmail.com. For source notes and further reading, as well as a list of all existing episodes, please visit our website at didn'treaditpod.com. We are recorded in Richmond, Virginia, with special thanks to Black Iris Social Club and Pesca Trio Publishing. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a review or rating on your preferred podcasting platform, or just tell a friend. If you did not enjoy today's episode, we are currently accepting applications for a full-time nemesis. Our intro music is Books, written, performed, and recorded by William Albritton.
A nation in distress, and we gave our glorious laddies on our banners to no less. For no gallant son of freedom to a tyrant's yoke should bend, and a noble heart must also